are the best cleave bridges in the game. Low cooldown, splash damage, and a defense break will cycle her or force a post ban against a stall comp player. How many times have you guys watched an RTA video or stream like that and you just thought, what'd you say? Hey guys, Uncle Valk here, and today I have for you guys 30 of the most commonly used slangs by legend players in Epic 7, and they're either words that will help you understand what is going on in game or ideas that help you out of game and maybe even roll better gear. So without further ado, here are my top RTA terms and concepts. Anchor. An anchor is what keeps a ship from flipping over. Usually in E7, that's a unit that's really hard to kill and can turn around a 1v2 or 1v3 scenario either with revive or damage. A bridge or a connector is a mid-speed unit that's designed to CR push up to your openers and then either crowd control or kill enemies, or CR push back the team, and maybe even they'll push up some of your units. They're very key to playing fast and aggressive strategies. A disruptor is a hard CC or a turn reset, and it stops your opponent from affecting the board state. Some of the best units at doing this are Noctwall and Fumir. Buff stacking is putting down so many buffs you are protecting the good ones versus characters that can only strip 1 to 2 buffs, such as versus Angel of Light or Sea Phantom Politis. They are most commonly achieved by playing units together like Navy Captain Landy, Protection Set Armin, and as well as putting down a lot of early buffs. Speed checking is rolling any piece of purple or red gear as long as has speed. A 1 starting speed can max roll all the way up to a 21 after its reforge. Since it's still RNG, doing this does not guarantee you being fast, but every single player who is fast will be doing this on a regular basis. HP is the biggest here since there are so many units in the meta like Blood Moon Haze and Dragon Brysenia that uses it very well, and crit chance and effectiveness checking are huge on boots since those are going to be the main stat sticks that will let your openers have their effective DPS stats. Tempo is high value per turn. High tempo in the game is doing a lot of things in one turn and then gassing out and trying to get your cooldowns back. A high tempo unit would be like Ran or Peyra. Low tempo is a unit that doesn't do very much at the beginning of the fight and they need to ramp to have one huge turn. And a low tempo unit is Dark Corvus, and in some cases, Laya. Fluff or chip damage is damage dealt by a non-DPS unit. When you're cleaving, Peyra S2 or even a Ran S3 sometimes will be considered fluff or chip damage since that's usually not what gets you the win, but could be important in doing things like triggering Albedo or Genua. 15% is kind of hard to explain since every debuff in Epic 7 has an innate 15% chance to be resisted regardless of your effectiveness or their effect resistance. It is hard coded into the game. The only way to bypass this is via the ignore effect resistance soul burns. It is a huge way for essentially any debuff player to lose a very big game. Resets is kind of confusing to explain. I don't know who started this, but delaying a unit's cooldown, as in increasing their cooldown, is called resetting a unit. But so is decreasing their cooldown, and they're both called resetting, as in a Lua can reset your unit and then a Laya can reset your unit right back. It is very context heavy. I don't know who started this. You know, I'm in the space and I just use the words, okay? Don't shoot me for this one. Push back and push up refers to manipulating a unit down or up a combat readiness bar. When you're pushing somebody back, you're delaying their turn. And when you're pushing a unit up, you're getting them to take their turn faster. A unit that pushes the enemy back would be like Sea Phantom Politis, and a easy unit to understand that pushes up your unit would be like Ahmed. Equipment score should be self-explanatory since you can just see it in game. Gear score, however, is a bit of an older system before equipment score was introduced into the game, and a lot of players still use that to calculate the value of their gear. So equipment score is every single stat including the main stat, whereas gear score calculates only your substats. CC, otherwise known as crowd control, stops an enemy from doing something entirely. It is essentially a debuff. A hard CC would be like stun or sleep that'll completely stop a turn, whereas a soft CC is like an attack down, a blind, silence, or provoke. You only tangentially stop a unit, and you don't stop them fully from playing their game. Unbuffable should be pretty self-explanatory, since in RTA, it's the name for the cannot be buffed debuff. It's just a mouthful, nobody's saying that. Prio means priority. Since in RTA, you can only draft one unit at a time, you need to prioritize your OP units so your opponents don't steal them from you. A good example would be like Blood Moon Haze, who is so strong you are likely to prio him every game as to steal it away from your opponent and to anchor down your composition. Tuning is a very deliberate way of min-maxing your units. You can tune any stat from speed to attack to HP for the sake of team building. A speed tuning would be like building your Ida to 80% of your Rand speed, and attack tuning would be building a character with very high attack so that your Adventurer Ross or Sea Phantom Politis will always pull them off of the dual attack. Cheese is a turn originating from the StarCraft days of esports. It is when you see a surprise tactic that's really out of pocket that players generally have a lack of info for to prepare against. A good example for that would be like Elixat versus Sama during the Europe regionals, and it's a great example since Elixat is a very strong cheese cleaver who relies a lot of his strategies around Fumir, which is a hero that if you lack the information you're playing against her or what she does, you will very likely drop a game or two versus her. But if you know your opponent's game and you're familiar with it, you can counter them pretty easily. Splash is additional damage as the end of the turn, especially when it's AoE like a Janua or Karina. It's significant as it bypasses damage limit and damage reduction passives like Sage Vivian. It doesn't trigger things like Janua and Dragonbright Senya passive. Cycle is taking turn after turn to refresh your cooldowns. It goes hand in hand with tempo. Speed buff cycles you a lot harder, and extra turns, sheesh, that's maximum cycling. So a unit like Lua is the perfect example of a character that cycles super hard, as she has both. A win or a lose condition is a very important concept to understand. It is the exact turn that's needed to happen for you to win or lose the game. The easiest way to achieve this is when you kill the last DPS in your opponent's standard team. That's the turn you win, hence your win condition, and something you need to think about from the beginning of the game. Flexibility is how well a character or a combination of characters can adapt to playing with different team strategies, otherwise known as flex. So for tanks, a Tywin is a particularly flexible character with his cleanse, defense breaks, versus somebody like Arrowell, who is really only defensive and stuns one time. As far as opener goes, Peyra is really flexible since she debuffs, she can buff, and she has stealth and escort, which keeps her alive and keeps her team alive, versus Rand. Yes, he does defense break, but isn't very flexible, because after you commit your Rand, you're basically stuck playing an aggressive strategy. Force Ban is a character that usually on pick 5 or pick 4, that if your opponent doesn't ban, they will instantly lose the match. The example here provided, my opponent drafts 2 focus units, which means both of them will be useless the moment I pick Solitaria. So in order to not instantly lose the game, my opponent is forced to ban Solitaria. Meta units in E7 tend to have 2 states, unactivated and activated. When building a team in PvP, it is very important to counter your opponent not only based on their units, but also their activation condition and their active condition. Likewise, when you build your team, you want to think about your units that need to be activated in order to pop off, and you want to find synergy within those. A pinch or a pincer is when either you or your opponent set up a 2-unit counter versus a very specific character. When done correctly, it will look like a crab's pincer. In the example here, my opponent's Aiden gets picked into my Janua, which gets absolutely pincered by not only the Janua, but also my later Karina, both of whom will activate the moment Aiden uses her high damage counterattack, resulting in her team getting run over by both the Karina and the Janua. A landmine is when you're drafting a unit that might not necessarily be good in its own spot, but it is there to set up a trap for your opponent later in the draft. The example here is that an Elbrus Knight like Navy Captain Landy is a landmine for AoE opener units. Janua and Karina from the last example are also good landmines for counterattack units like the Landy and like the Savior Auden. While Politis is also a great landmine for non-attack skills like Angel of Flight or Janua, she is a little bit hard to play. When drafting at a very high level, it is very important to try to decipher what strategy your opponent is approaching the game with and land landmine their drafts appropriately. And speaking of landmines are usually what you use to hold something hostage. For example, when you draft a Selene or a Politis, you are holding Sea Phantom Politis Ultimate hostage, because the moment she presses it, your units will pop off and get a lot of damage in. So when you're holding something hostage, especially a cooldown, you are forcing your opponent to be too scared to use that skill. Neutral is fairly easy to explain, since RTA is a game predicated on punishing your opponent's weaknesses and punishing their mistakes. A neutral unit like Blood Moon Haste is either difficult to counter, or, for example, one of the units that counters him is Savior Auden, but when your opponent picks Savior Auden, you can counter her right back with better units that not only are strong standalone, but are also great with Blood Moon Haste. And that in itself makes him a strong neutral way to open up your draft and build your strategy on. And to loop back to the activation condition term, playing a line of units and finding a common synergy in PvP is playing a line. For example, the Enrage line is particularly powerful right now due to Sea Phantom Politis, Janua, and A Taiwan all having excellent synergies with each other. Specimen Says line might look real familiar to you if you watch the E7WC, which is honestly just a stun comp. Their synergy is so strong, and it makes Specimen the star of that strategy. And certain line can be attributed to specific players if they're the ones that popularized it. For example, like the KHM line. And speaking of KHM, that's somebody you're gonna hear their name a lot. He is a French RTA player who either originated or popularized the most efficient way to play tank down, which is why players are always talking about KHM or crediting him with their victories in their interviews. Slow players usually crawl his E7.GG profile early in the season to figure out how he's approaching each season when they have to play without speed. And like activators for specific units, enablers open up your strategies to specific lines. For example, Death Dealer Ray enables you to play debuff and stall. Laya enables you to play any type of tank down, because when you have her locked in, she will be able to not only cleanse all debuffs at the beginning of the game, but also reset your cooldowns if your cooldowns have been reset. Recognizing enablers not only help you build up your strategies, but also identify your opponent's strategy and diffuse them. Alright, and that is 30 of the most commonly used slangs or terms or whatever you have them. And lastly, you guys know I gotta give you guys a few on top, so here are some commonly referred to units that some people might get confused about if it's your first few times tuning into an RTA stream. First up are the ML5 hero names. You got the abbreviation gang like BMH, DDR, LRK, SSV. You got the first letter M smashing into the rest of their name like Molly or Malona. You got ones where it's just taking a word out of their name like Conk, Briar, Spectre. Those should be really easy. And you got the ones where it's like a combined word like Spez, Rylet, Fiend, or Candy. After that would be Monk. Monk is just Nadalon Monk, Nakwol, and she was called Nadalon Monk upon her introduction into the game, so a lot of players, especially older players, including myself, still call her Monk, just for simplicity. Next up is Albedo. That is the name of a good-ass unit that sure as hell don't need a buff. You hear that one, Reddit? Yeah, I hope so. And if you're running around RTA and you hear names being called like Genazad, Jamal, Jotaro, or Jameson, they're talking about Janua. On his release, the community somehow took it personally on calling him literally every J name imaginable besides Janua, so if you ever hear one of those weird-ass units being referred to with a J name, it's probably Janua. And lastly, we got Biden Blast. They're referring to Dragon Bright Senya. I mean, you see it, the meme explains itself. And with that, that is all of the unit names and slangs that you guys most commonly ask for in my streams explained. If there's anything else you guys hear around, I don't know, the streams and videos and the RTA scene and you still don't understand, leave it to me in the DMs. This is a perfect opportunity for me to cover some more of them. That being said, that's all I got for this video. If you found it helpful, make sure to like it up and subscribe if you want to see videos similar to this one. I'm starting to run out of ideas on how to do outros. That's all I got. I'll see you guys during E7WC with me and my boy Divine. That's it. Get out of here. Bye. Bye. All right. Shoo.